Yes, so welcome back. I'm delighted to be joined by Billy Bambrough, who is an expert in cryptocurrency. You write about it for Forbes. You also have, I believe, a briefing, a kind of like an email thing called Crypto Codex. So say, first of all, thanks so much for your time. Really grateful.
No problem. Great to be here.
See, the crypto community is fascinating, and looking at it from a kind of an outside perspective, it seems to me there's two main reasons people get involved. So the first is like the classic investment. So, generally a high risk, high reward investment. And the second is people who see it almost as a kind of political societal project, that they want to change the way our society is organised. They want to reduce the power of central banks, of government, etc. I mean, obviously, in practice, they often do overlap quite a bit. I mean, first of all, do you think that's a fair description? And second of all, where would you come in on that?
Yes, I think that's spot on, really. So one of the prime reasons that almost everyone gets involved in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency stuff is because of the price, and that it moves regularly, and that it moves regularly a lot. So there's a lot of potential to make big gains, and that is very attractive to a lot of people. The price over the last few years has gone up a lot, and that means that some people have become very, very wealthy as a result. When Bitcoin was originally created in 2009, there was always this kind of idea that the price could go up and up and up. It was, some of the original comments on forums discussing Bitcoin suggested that one Bitcoin token could in the future be worth millions of dollars, and we're not there yet. Maybe it'll get there one day. I mean, it seems almost unbelievable that we are currently at a stage where one Bitcoin token is worth over $30,000. So it has gone up very quickly in a relatively short amount of time. So going back to kind of the history of Bitcoin and where cryptocurrencies all started. When Bitcoin was first created, it was worth pennies of fractions of a dollar, nothing at all really, and people would effectively give them away for free and try to encourage people to use it, and this snowballed into a much bigger movement of people that were interested in using this technology to do different things. Now, as well as the price going up and down as it does quite a lot, Bitcoin has also, and what the technology really does, and I think is the most interesting thing, created the phenomenon of digital scarcity, which for the first time means that things that are created as software cannot be infinitely reproduced, i.e. by hitting Control-C and Control-V, copy and pasting on your computer. So you can't just make more Bitcoins. It does this via a method called proof of work, which means that computers have to solve complex mathematical equations in order to generate new Bitcoin and validate the transactions that are happening on the Bitcoin network. So this is a way of taking energy or electricity here in the real world, putting it into the virtual world, and making something scarce or finite because of this energy that's being used in the real world. And this really is, I think, the interesting thing about Bitcoin. This is what Bitcoin did. The problem that it solved, which was called the double spend problem, meant that it prevented more than one person from spending the same Bitcoin twice, or even the same person from spending the same Bitcoin twice. So there was only ever a certain amount of Bitcoin which would be accountable on the blockchain, which is what the ledger of transactions is called, and this has allowed all sorts of different ideas to be developed using the technology around this idea of digital scarcity, which will mean we're able to use blockchain technology instead of trusted third parties like banks and other kind of accountants and other ways of keeping tracks of things. So yeah, that's a very sort of simple explanation of where Bitcoin started and why it's so popular now, which is the price movements.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting that you mentioned obviously the role of banks. I mean, the kind of different governments take a very different attitude to Bitcoin, it seems. So, I mean, I know China very recently obviously cracked down massively on Bitcoin mining, whereas El Salvador has now made it legal tender. And both of those moves had kind of significant impacts on the value of Bitcoin. I mean, how kind of vulnerable do you think Bitcoin is to central governments still?
I think very vulnerable.
Yeah.
In a practical sense. So the power of the state still comes from the threat of imprisonment or physical harm. So if a government or a state wanted people to stop using Bitcoin, they would say anyone that uses Bitcoin is going to get arrested or tied up or shot or whatever, and people would stop using it. So it would, if the threat from the state was significant enough, it would deter people from using Bitcoin or anything else for that matter. So there is a very good possibility that that governments around the world decide that Bitcoin should no longer exist, and they work together to make it a highly punishable offense to run a Bitcoin node, which is hooking your computer up to the Bitcoin network, mining Bitcoin, which is directing processing power towards the Bitcoin network, or trading Bitcoin, which is just sending Bitcoin from one person or another. If doing any of these three things came with a significant time in jail or whatever, then people would just stop using it, and the distribution of the Bitcoin network would shrink and shrink and shrink, and so it wouldn't be as decentralized, and it wouldn't be as incorruptible or unhackable, and eventually it would get hacked, and then the value of Bitcoin would fall to zero. So I do think this is a possibility that this could happen. The likelihood of it happening seems relatively low because, as we've seen, as you said, there are different countries that are interested in Bitcoin in different ways. So China, we've seen, not unsurprisingly really, being such an authoritarian state, it doesn't particularly like people doing stuff with Bitcoin that it can't manage, control, and regulate very tightly. Whereas other countries like El Salvador are interested in allowing Bitcoin to flourish. So if Bitcoin gets chased out of China, it's likely just to go somewhere else. And we've seen this somewhat in the last couple of weeks with Bitcoin miners setting up in the US. But they are also going to face quite a difficult situation because lots of regulators and lawmakers in the US don't particularly like that either, because of the very high energy costs that Bitcoin has and its effect on the environment. So so yeah, there is this chance that a crackdown by governments will weaken Bitcoin and potentially send the price significantly lower. That, I think it's unlikely it will kill Bitcoin entirely. Bitcoin will always sort of manage to hold on and stay, stick around, but potentially at a much smaller price and a level of distribution than it currently has. So yeah, there's a good possibility that something like this could happen, but at the moment, when we're still seeing different countries sort of try and decide exactly how they want to manage Bitcoin and what they want to allow to happen here in the UK, Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has suggested that he is interested in opening up the cryptocurrency economy and trying to help the UK become a crypto hub. Whether this will come to much, I think Rishi Sunak does seem like the kind of guy that would be interested in doing this kind of thing, but sort of the practicalities of it are still just very unknown. So it's something that I can tell there's interest in, and there's a big potential for money to be made, and for the UK potentially to carve out a niche post Brexit, and in a brave new post Brexit world to maintain its financial hub reputation and status, really throwing itself into the Bitcoin and crypto economy. And Rishi Sunak suggested Britcoin, and that we might end up with a central bank digital currency that works in a similar way to some cryptocurrencies. So there's different things going on in different parts of the world, but it's still a long way of knowing exactly how different countries will ultimately respond to this emerging technology.
Yeah, I would say Bitcoin, which you just mentioned, is really interesting. I mean, do you think that central bank or central bank controlled online currencies could actually pose a serious threat to, the likes of Bitcoin and Dogecoin, et cetera, et cetera?
I would say not. I think they won't pose a threat to it exactly because they're doing a different thing. They're still a centralized technology. So Facebook's what was called Libra and now has been renamed Diem. Would be a cryptocurrency, but centrally controlled by Facebook and a consortium of other companies. So while it would potentially have some characteristics of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, it would be lacking the main one, which is its decentralized nature. That is, it's not controlled by a central authority.
Yeah.
And so any central bank digital currency would likely share those same characteristics of being controlled by one central authority. And the technology can be used in that way and will be able to both speed up transactions and allow the state to offer financial services in a way that it never has done before, effectively or potentially cutting out the commercial banking sector entirely, which will have a pretty devastating effect if it does happen, which is still very up in the air. But exactly how banks would be able to lend money in the way that they currently do, if they are not able to hold deposits because all the deposits, individual people's deposits, are held at the central bank, it would just be very disruptive and potentially catastrophic for the financial services sector. So it would be just such a radical change that it's unknown how exactly it would affect it.
That's fascinating because obviously, as you were saying earlier, one of the reasons why Bitcoin was first created is eventually to reduce the power of central banks. And if the net result of online currency, obviously not Bitcoin specifically, but online currency, is to increase the power of central banks, then it will be completely counterintuitive to what everyone was expecting it to do.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very sort of almost paradoxical idea. When Bitcoin's creator, the anonymous Satoshi Nakamoto, created Bitcoin, it was in direct response to the 2008 financial crisis and the mismanagement of the economy by central banks. So that has been very tied into the culture and community of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies for a long time. A lot of Bitcoin proponents talk about the value of what they call hard money, which is non-fiat currency, which so fiat currency being currency that is backed by a government, but not by any kind of physical reserves. So Bitcoin is more of a return to something similar to the gold standard that was abandoned in the 20th century because it just didn't really scale properly. Now, a lot of Bitcoin people think that we would be better off as a society and an economy going back to something like this. A lot of more traditional economists strongly disagree, and really we just don't know what the effects would be trying to move the modern economy back onto something like the gold standard. I think realistically it would probably not work effectively and would be a bit of a mess, potentially making wealth inequality far worse than it already is. So yeah, there's a lot of problems with the current fiat model, but I don't think that necessarily means that the solution to it would be to go to a Bitcoin standard or even a gold standard again. So there's a lot of debate around this, and people trying to figure out exactly what it would mean to adopt Bitcoin on a much sort of larger societal level. Really, a lot of people in the community talk about hyper Bitcoinization, which is the idea that lots of people begin to adopt Bitcoin very, very quickly, or other cryptocurrencies, I suppose. But realistically, I think we're a very, very long way away from that. Another big thing that happened sort of in the last 10 years of Bitcoin is that the financial services sector got its act together in regard to digital and electronic payments. When Bitcoin was created, there was PayPal, and there was my headphones have just turned off. They're out of battery. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Can
is it
you
still
hear me?
coming? Okay, I think I would just be fine. I'm just going to turn it off. Wireless problems.
There's always some technical issue.
Yeah. So the financial services sector got its act together in terms of digital payments, and actually made digital payments far more far better than they currently were. So companies like TransferWise and PayPal itself, and Stripe, and there's been lots of companies in the last 10 years or so that have made digital transactions just far simpler than they used to be. And that's including cross-border transactions. One of the reasons Bitcoin was created, and you can read in its white paper, was to make cross-border transactions simpler. Banks just figured out how to do this on their own. They're still not perfect, but they're far better than they used to be, and they will likely just get better with time on the old financial system. So yeah, one of the things that has changed in the last few years of within cryptocurrency kind of conversation is whether cryptocurrencies are a new way to pay for things. Like, is that what they're going to be useful for? And that idea has almost entirely faded away for the store of value narrative that Bitcoin is going to increase in value over time. So you just want to buy it and hold it in the same way you would do gold. Whereas 10 years ago, people did think that, or did imagine that Bitcoin might be used as a form of currency in the same way pounds and dollars and euros currently are. But it seems that we've moved away from that almost entirely, apart from quite recently the news out of El Salvador that they do want to adopt it as legal tender. I'm pretty skeptical that the El Salvador Bitcoin experiment is going to come to much. I think it will quite likely just end up not being used very much by local people, or at least take many, many years to become widely used. It's not going to be an overnight thing, as far as I can see.
In the El Salvador thing, what's kind of their motive for doing it? I've heard two things, which is the first is that they have a lot of population living abroad sending money back. So sending it back in Bitcoin might make that in some way easy for some people. And the second, I suppose, is that they very heavily use the dollar. So it's not like they've got their own currency that they're damaging by the drops in Bitcoin. But I mean, beyond that, what's the logic for them doing this?
I mean, those two things are big, officially, the two big reasons for it. De-dollarization, so to try and move the country away from dependency on the dollar when you are trying to run a country, but your central bank is run by another country is quite difficult. So they aren't in charge of monetary policy. They aren't in charge of their own monetary policy, which makes spending decisions difficult. Then at the same time, they do have, as you say, lots of money coming into the country from abroad. So it's a way to try and make remittances easier and cheaper. So these two are sort of both like quite admirable and positive goals that they're trying to achieve, which makes sense. Whether Bitcoin is a particularly useful way to try and achieve them, I'm not so sure. A big part of other like unofficial reasons why they're doing it is because it has created a huge amount of buzz for the country. It's seen as a very sort of pioneering thing to do, but it's incredibly risky. It's not something that a robust democracy would have could consider doing in this way, because there just isn't a plan. There isn't, like, no one knows how it's going to work. There's no infrastructure for it. Without an authoritarian leader pushing it through, it wouldn't stand up to scrutiny by lawmakers and the equivalent of MPs in Parliament. It would be a non-starter, really, because it's just such a radical experiment with people's money and livelihoods. And there has also been a lot of accusations that the funds that the government accrues and ring fences for the Bitcoin project is going to be siphoned off and just extorted and seized, and it will just end up in the hands of criminals. But that's speculative, and I don't have any sort of evidence for that. But realistically, that's how I imagine it working out in the short term. At least there's a chance that over the long term they do find a way to make it work. But in terms of the plans that have been published and how far along they are to actually making it happen, it seems like there just isn't a particularly workable model to go off to make it happen.
Yeah. Over the last year, obviously Bitcoin has exploded in value. I think it hit 663,000 or something in April. Has since fallen back a bit, but it's still a lot higher than where it was. But some of the other coins have surged far more. So I noticed you wrote a piece of Forbes about Ethereum, and there's people talk about, could one of the other coins knock Bitcoin off its perch as kind of the main cryptocurrency. Do you think that's a realistic prospect?
Yes. So the kind of theory behind this is that the Bitcoin price has largely increased over the last few months and years because it has the narrative of being a store of value. That is, if you buy Bitcoin today, it will be worth more tomorrow. Whereas something like Ethereum and the many rivals to Ethereum, which have emerged over the last few years, such as Polkadot and Solana, and there's a load more. I'm just pulling a blank on all of them. Cardano is another big one. So the theory is that these are much more sort of utility tokens. That is to say that they will be used, they derive their value from use on the network. So when people use smart contracts, which can be used to do things like lend money and underwrite insurance and prediction markets and lots of different ideas within the decentralized finance system, the value of these tokens rises as more people use these products and services. But the big difference between them is that Bitcoin is digitally scarce, whereas most of these are not. They have either effectively infinite supply or actually infinite supply. That is to say, there will just always be more and more and more Ether tokens, or the equivalent of whichever other network. So while they are using cryptocurrency concepts and technology, they are a very different form of technology to Bitcoin itself, which is much more static and boring, really. All it is very Bitcoin, just the reason that it has increase in value as it has, and is still around today, I think, is because it doesn't change. It is relatively immutable, and that's what people like about it. That's why it is of interest to speculators and investors, I think, whereas the others are much more about the technological development and utility that they bring, and that's where they derive their value from. And so if these ecosystems of users grow big enough and gain widespread adoption, then it's perfectly possible that the market value of, say, Ethereum or any of the others could far exceed Bitcoin's value.
Yeah, this is a really horrible question, but how high can Bitcoin go? So I remember back in April when it was obviously doing very well. There are lots of articles about it's inevitably going to hit $100,000. It's just a matter of time. Perhaps it could replace gold as the kind of the default store of value. And obviously it's now not quite halved, but nearly halved in value. Some of that stuff's fallen back, but the price has moved around massively before. I mean, do you think it's more likely than not it'll hit 100K?
Honestly, I have no idea. If you'd have asked me a year ago whether Bitcoin would get to $65,000 in 2021, I would have said it seemed unlikely.
Yeah.
So I think it's perfectly possible, but I wouldn't like to hazard a guess on whether I think it would do or not, because so much of the Bitcoin value is derived from media hype and interest in it. So you can track the Bitcoin price pretty closely to Google Trends data, and you can see that as searches for the word Bitcoin go up, as does the price, and they do go up very much sort of at the same time as each other. One doesn't really drag the other higher; they move in tandem, and the price of Bitcoin is purely based on how much interest there is in it currently around the world, and the reason that the price has fallen in the last few months is because interest has dropped off. There was a rising tide of interest through the first few months of 2021 that peaks in April, and then has been declining since. And if something changes with the fundamentals, that is, as we've seen happen in China in the last few days, that the Chinese government has said that the Bitcoin miners need to turn off their machines, that has had an effect on the Bitcoin price. But if we see some kind of renewed interest in America, say, or in Europe or in anywhere else, picking up on this, driving the Bitcoin narrative and media hype forward, then I expect the price to return. If one of the big drivers of the price earlier this year was the news that Elon Musk was showing more interest in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and added Bitcoin to Tesla's corporate balance sheet. If other companies begin to do that, that will help people have better confidence in Bitcoin, so they will start buying again, which will fuel another rally. And so Bitcoin seems to very naturally work on these boom and bust cycles that seem to be largely around the media hype about it. And really, there is very little reason Bitcoin is currently worth what it is, or whether it should be worth $100,000 per token or $1,000 per token. The Bitcoin network will function just as well at $1,000 per token as it will at $100,000 per token. So there's no real need for it to be where it currently is. So I think there's a chance that it might go significantly higher, but there's an equal chance that it will go significantly lower, and one Bitcoin will still be one Bitcoin. And a lot of people that put money in will have lost money. but that doesn't really affect the technology very much.
You mentioned Elon Musk, and that's going to be my next question. I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, but I mean, what the hell is he playing at, basically?
It's a yeah, it's a very good question that a lot of people have asked. As far as I can tell, and I follow his thoughts on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies quite closely.
Yeah.
He is very interested in the technology and the digital scarcity aspect of it, and of course, its money-making potential. He is one of the richest people in the world. He's grown more than 2 companies to a very high valuation. He is a technologist, an engineer, but I think firstly a business person and a money-making person. So I think he understands the money-making potential of running your own currency. And this is why he has expressed so much interest, I think, in Dogecoin, because he sees there to be quite a lot of potential there in a company that is able to manage its own currency. I wouldn't be surprised, and then this is all very speculative, if we saw any kind of more concrete moves from Elon Musk and Tesla and possibly SpaceX to adopt Dogecoin as some sort of official currency of the company, and trying to develop it for use, and so that people actually could use it as a means of payment, and so Tesla can, so Elon Musk and one of his companies could pick up the fees earned from transactions, which would be, if people are using it a lot, there's an awful lot of money to be made on transaction fees, which is how most Bitcoin and cryptocurrency exchanges and cryptocurrency businesses in general make their money. One of the reasons that we saw PayPal begin facilitating Bitcoin payments late last year, which largely sparked the latest cryptocurrency bull run, is because it saw how much money Cash App, Square's payments app, was making from allowing the trading of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And this was all just a pure profit for Cash App and Square, and PayPal was, understandably like, why aren't we making money in this very simple way as well, by letting people swap these tokens and just skimming off the top? And so PayPal began doing exactly the same thing, and it hasn't really meant anything for cryptocurrency adoption other than more people are swapping tokens amongst each other, hoping that they're going to hold one when its price takes off.
Yeah. Now,
this isn't obviously like useful for anyone. This is just currency trading, foreign exchange trading that banks have done for a long time, that individuals are now just doing and playing the markets. It's effectively just gambling. But lots of people were very excited at the time by PayPal opening up their markets to their accounts to cryptocurrencies and the influx of new users. And one of the other sort of effects of the cryptocurrency boom and bust cycles is that every time the price goes significantly higher, a huge amount of capital and interest and technological expertise is directed towards cryptocurrency, and then the price drops off, but some of that interest remains, and so different services are built and different technologies developed, and then the whole cycle starts again. So in this way, the theory goes is how useful cryptocurrency products and services will be developed. As prices shoot higher, it brings in a lot of interest, and then prices fall back again, in which time developers and people, engineers, create different things, and then they ride the cycles over and over and over again.
I was very interested. You mentioned, I think it was a couple of answers back, the value of Bitcoin kind of traces the publicity quite well. And obviously, one thing Elon Musk is a genius at is publicity. So I'm thinking, firing a Tesla into space. And I saw he had a plan to put a Dogecoin on the moon and that kind of thing. I mean, is he literally just using his own publicity to boost one currency, kind of not artificially pushing it, but um, using his own kind of public figure to massively ramp up one currency? And is that slightly dodgy?
If I, I do think this is sort of an unfortunate byproduct of his interest. He is one of the most famous people in the world. He does have, I don't know, 50 million followers on Twitter or whatever that does move markets when he tweets about things or says anything about anything at any time. So he can't really help it. And I don't think it is his intention to do it. I think he is quite playful with it and messes around with it and doesn't take it particularly seriously. But it doesn't seem to be the intention, largely because the US Securities and Exchange Commission would put him in jail or fine him so much money if it found that he was intentionally profiting from moving markets in this way. Like it would be a pretty serious breach of market manipulation rules.
Yeah.
And I just don't think it's something that he's already got so much money. I don't think he's bothered about manipulating the price of Dogecoin or any other cryptocurrency to make a few more billion. It doesn't. I mean, it's possible. It just doesn't quite ring true with someone of his already wealth, and he seems to be pretty busy with other things. That I think, like you say, that he does like to generate headlines, and he uses his social media persona to do that. But I don't think it's his intention to intentionally move the price to profit.
Yeah. I mean, just one final question. So obviously, when Musk sort of drew back a bit from Bitcoin, it was the green issue, which was what he highlighted. And climate change. I mean, got the Glasgow coming up. It's very high up the agenda. I mean, can Bitcoin get over its kind of environmental issue?
I think it probably can't. I think that the Bitcoin network, as going right back to what I said at the beginning, Bitcoin creates digital scarcity through using energy in the real world. So it needs to use this energy to do what it's meant to do. I think it could use less energy, but it always will use quite a lot. As renewable energy becomes cheaper and easily usable, we will see Bitcoin's carbon footprint go down, but we won't see its overall energy use go down. I don't expect, again, like going back to what I'd said before, if countries do decide to band together and all crack down on Bitcoin and prevent people from using it, then the energy requirements will go down a lot, almost to zero, because no one will be allowed to run the network. People will still do, but so few compared to the numbers that currently do. So that will mean that the energy requirements go down. But if Bitcoin remains popular and legal, I can't see its energy use going down at all, really. Like I said, if we use green energy more, then its carbon footprint will go down, but not its energy use. And so much of the environmental concerns is just about energy use broadly, not just about increasing green energy use, but about lowering energy demands across the board. I think it is going to be an issue that Bitcoin is constantly beaten with, and yeah. People will always say we shouldn't be using this energy to create this virtual thing. And realistically, the argument boils down to, is having a scarce virtual asset worth expending a lot of energy on?
Yeah.
If you think that it is, then it's fine. If you think that it isn't, then Bitcoin uses too much energy. So that really is all that it comes down to.
I mean, I know I said last question, but very quickly. I mean, do you think that the whole environmental thing could basically be Bitcoin's Achilles heel? I mean, environmental concerns are becoming so prominent, demand to cut carbon, etc. It seems to fly in the face of all that. And if there's no obvious way to address that, is that going to be its downfall?
I think it very well could be. I think that the energy demands, the use in ransomware and by criminals generally, these things are not ever going to be completely removable for Bitcoin. They will always be there. And as a result, we could see countries decide to say no more Bitcoin, and anyone that's caught using Bitcoin or mining Bitcoin or hooking up to a Bitcoin node will be arrested. So if that happens, then yeah, we could realistically see no more Bitcoin. And as you say, environmental policies and concerns are very top of mind at the moment, and growing in importance for a lot of people. So it could well be the thing that does kill off Bitcoin. It's hard to say, and yeah, like I said, if lots of miners do begin using solar or wind or hydroelectric or geothermal energy to mine Bitcoin, it will significantly reduce the carbon footprint, but it will still have a carbon footprint that's quite sizable. It will never go away entirely.
Well, I say, Billy, it's been a huge pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for your time.